Hello friends, this is Joseph, and today I'll be showing you an updated deck list of Prossh, Skyraider of Kher. This deck has been my very first deck tech ever, my very first deck list, and what got me started into Commander. It's very close to my heart. It's gone through years of morphing and changing. I've read your comments, seen your suggestions, and this deck has a lot of new cards put into it in the last year. And I wanted to show you the 2017 version of it opposed to the previous iterations. So take encouragement from this video because a lot of the cards put into this deck list are thanks to your suggestions and the comments that I've received, and that's really encouraging to me, and I hope it's an encouragement to you as well. So Prossh is a 5/5 flying legendary creature dragon. When you cast him, you get X01 Cobalt creatures. And he has the sacrifice ability to sacrifice other creatures, and he gets +1/+0 till end of turn. So he's a very powerful commander, one of the top tier ones, and he's just very versatile, and this is, my Prossh deck. I hope you enjoy watching this video. So my Prossh deck consists of 3 major sections to make the deck function. There is sack outlets, token producers, and Death Matters cards. So these are the token producers / token doublers. Parallel Lives, Master Breeder, and Doubling Season all essentially just double your creatures on the field. Then some of these also kind of fill 2 spots in the sort of the deck. The Predator and the Reveler both can ramp you as well as give you creature tokens. So they're both pretty versatile and enable you to play Prossh a turn earlier. The Predator with the 2 Eldrazi spawns that he can sacrifice, and the Reveler, when you cast him on turn 4, you may already have 1 or 2 creatures on the field and can generate a little bit extra mana the next turn so that you can cast Prossh. The Slime is very unique because he comes in as a 4/4, but if you have any doubling effect out there, then when you sack him, he comes back as 4 2/2s, and then later on, those 2/2s produce another 8 1/1s. So he could be 13 creatures at best, or he's at worst 7 creatures. But having all those enter the battlefield or death triggers off of that one card alone is quite powerful. I have Grave Titan and the Broodmother, both kind of extra cards that kind of can replace Prossh after he's died a few times. Typically you want Prossh to die so you can cast him numerous times to get the extra creature tokens, but once he costs 10 and higher, he can be difficult to cast, and these are kind of alternative cards to do the same effect. An Avenger of Zendikar is often a tooth and nail target, but can also synergize with some of the other cards in the deck. But he's a big creature token producer, and if he's left unchecked, he can just take over the game. So he is a powerful card in this deck. He's not meant for evergreen deck. Yes, he's a staple card, but don't throw him into evergreen deck because some decks don't actually need him and it's not the best choice. But yeah, these are the creature tokens that I'm running in the deck. I guess the big changes have been the Broodmother was one that you guys suggested, and Doubling Season, obviously I just didn't have a copy at the time when I filmed the original video. And I believe Grave Titan was also a suggestion. So those are 3 of the more bigger changes that I added to the deck list. So these are the Death Matters cards. Impact Tremors, Cutthroat, Blood Artist, and Perforos are some of the staple cards you see in these strategies. Whenever a creature dies or enters the battlefield, you essentially do damage to your opponents, and this can be a very explosive way to win the game. If you cast Prossh for 6 mana and you get 6 Cobalts plus Prossh, that's 7 creatures entering the battlefield at once. With Perforos out, that's 14 damage to each opponent. Now just imagine if you have Doubling Season out or other sort of effects, you end up doing a lot of damage. It's pretty insane. Then Catacomb Sifter, Mirren, Death Reap Ritual, they all kind of give you some sort of card advantage by either letting you scry or draw cards or return cards from your graveyard to the battlefield or hand. They're all really good. What I like to do with Death Reap Ritual is, on each of my opponent's turns, if a creature didn't die that turn, on their end step I'll sacrifice a single Cobalt to draw a card. And if you're playing with 3 other opponents, and you could do this on each of their turns, then Death Reap Ritual, with a full round of the table, if it's not removed, will draw you at least 4 cards on your turn and each of their turns. And it ends up being a way nicer harmonize for the deck, and has potential of drawing you way more cards over the course of the whole game. Dictated Erebos and Grave Pact are kind of like board wipes. You know, one weakness of the deck is not necessarily having enough flyers, or Voltron strategies can just kind of overcome you and just beat you through combat damage. So having cards like Grave Pact and Dictated Erebos to sacrifice a 0/1 Cobalt to make your opponent sacrifice their big angel or dragon or demon or something is very powerful. So those are my Death Matters cards. Ideally you want at least one of these, if not 2 of them, on the field to really go off and win the game. So they're very essential for the deck to win. Next up is the sack outlets. These are also very essential. Prossh is a sack outlet in and of himself, but you know, sometimes you don't always have access to him. Skull Clamp I really like. You can attach it to one of your Kobolds, it instantly dies, draws you 2 cards. So I put it in the sack category because it kind of does the same thing. Spawning Pit is also very unique because it's a card that a lot of people don't actually use, and if you have a doubling effect out there, you sacrifice your 6 Kobolds to put 6 charge counters on it, and then you would only get 3 spawn artifact creatures into play by doing so. But if you have a doubling effect, you actually get 6 2/2 spawns. So it kind of like keeps an engine going if you have a doubling effect. So you know, you cast Prossh, you get 6 creatures, you sack 6, you get another 6 creatures. I mean, you have to pay the additional 1 mana, but it does a lot of work and can be a nice combo piece if you're planning to wipe the board anyways, to sacrifice all your creatures onto this, and then you at least kind of have creatures that you can instantly get back the following turn. Very nice. Goblin Bombardment, Ashnod's Altar, powerhouse cards. Attrition is basically a spot removal card. Birthing Pod generates card advantage. You can sacrifice creatures. Ideally with Birthing Pod you want to sacrifice Anger, or find a way to put Anger into your graveyard so you can give your creatures haste, and then search for one of your 5 casting cost token producers. The Hypnotist is a really unique one for the deck because you can cast this on turn 5 and cast Prossh on turn 6 instantly. Because this is sorcery speed, a sack outlet, you can't really do it on your opponent's turns. Ideally you want to sacrifice your 6 Kobolds, and you have the option then to make your opponents discard essentially their whole hand. Because if you're playing with 3 opponents and you sacrifice 6 creatures in one turn, and you know, each of your opponents discards 4 cards, that might make each opponent hellbent and really secure your position in the game. That is a bit of a mean way to go about it, but at the same time, discard isn't very popular in Commander, and it is something I've been exploring, and I think is quite powerful if it hits all your opponents, or if you can make it an even effect. Then I have some lands that kind of sacrifice creatures for utility. So High Market can sacrifice creatures, but Westvale Abbey is the big one. You know, if you cast Prossh and you have 6 Kobolds, then you can instantly sacrifice like 5 of them to transform it, and you get this massive creature. I'm sure you've all seen the other side of Westvale Abbey, but you get a flying, lifelink, indestructible, hasty creature that is really hard to deal with, so this is really good against combating some of those Voltron strategies as well. So these are my combat-oriented cards. The top 4 there are haste enablers. Ideally you want to get Anger into your graveyard as fast as possible. I have a lot of the shock lands and such, so it'll be pretty easy to have a mountain on the field. Sarkhan Vol both gives you a haste enabler as well as the ability to take control of your opponent's creatures, which then you can attack with your opponent's creatures and then sacrifice it before you give it back to them, so they never get it back, which is nice. And if you ever get to ultimate with Sarkhan, you're getting 5 4/4 red dragon creature tokens, and you know, if you have any doubling effects, that's a pretty good ultimate for the deck. God of the Revels kind of combos nicely with Prossh, because if Prossh comes in with 6 Kobolds and you sacrifice all 6, he can have 11 power and 5 toughness, and then God of Revels doubles his power and gives him haste. So if you play God of Revels on turn 5 and Prossh on turn 6, you're potentially able to swing in for 22 commander damage, which is really hard to deal with. Then Beastmaster Ascension and Craterhoof Behemoth are there more for just winning through combat damage as well. Again, with Prossh being a creature and the 6 that he brings in with him, you're getting 7 creatures right away, and if you have a haste enabler and can attack, Beastmaster Ascension will immediately get to 7 counters on it, and then all your Kobolds will become 5/5s, 5/6s, and your Prossh then becomes a 10/10, and then you're hitting for 40 damage. So those are 2 cards that can really win the game out of nowhere with Prossh. It's like a 2-card combo. And then Craterhoof Behemoth again is a later card that you can cast with either Tooth or Nail or something, and if you have a lot of Kobolds, they all get really big and can trample in for a win. Then Death Storehouse and Bloodsoaked Keep. I just wanted some utility lands that could make Prossh a little bit more evasive, and it seemed a little odd to see First Strike on a land, and with a black, green, and red deck, I mean, red does have a little bit of First Strike, but it's mostly, it just seems like an uncharacteristic ability for a Jund deck. Usually you expect it in like Boros or like a white deck basically, so this is kind of giving some potential combat tricks and such. So there you have it, those are my combat cards. So for this deck, I wanted to get Prossh out consistently and quickly, as fast as possible, because he is such an explosive commander, and you know, he typically will die at least once, and you want to cast him as many times as possible, so you have to consider his casting cost being like 8 and 10 as well, after he's died a couple times. So you got your staple like Soul Ring. I think Burgeoning is one of my favorite green cards now. It's just very powerful. I talk about it like every video and every deck. Cryptolith Rite is really nice if you have a haste enabler, because Prossh will come in, yeah, get your total of 7 creatures, and they can all be tapped to produce mana, and then play other spells, and it just gets out of hand quickly. Because I noticed with Prossh, you typically will have creatures entering the battlefield and leaving the battlefield, but they don't necessarily get their full benefit when they are on the battlefield. So typically I'm waiting for my opponent to attack me and to use my Kobolds as blockers and then sacrifice them to do an ability, or you want to be able to attack in on combat damage, and then if some damage doesn't go through or some get blocked, then sacrifice those to do different effects too, just to make sure you're getting maximum benefit out of all your resources. And Cryptolith Rite kind of enables another level to it. Then Sakura Tribe Elder, I mean, you want creatures so that you can also have other sack outlets. And Awakening Zone and From Beyond are 2 probably the better ones, because every single upkeep, every one of your upkeeps, you get a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn that can be sacrificed to produce mana. And this is really good for just ramping as well as getting more creatures on the field. And if you have doubling effects, you're getting a lot of value off them. Then I like Chromota's Reach and Cultivate. They're kind of like my go-tos. This deck could call for a Wood Elves or Farhaven Elves or some other options, because they are also creatures. Then Solemn Simulacrum and Oracle of Moldiah, they're just fantastic cards. And I decided to put in Minna and Den Wildborn. I remember having her in my Omnath deck, and that one's really successful. So she's just a good card I want to play with, and can enable some cool combat tricks. If you have Avenger Zendikar out, which is my only landfall creature, you can often get multiple triggers off the landfall, and sometimes if you don't have a land to play, you can just give one of your creatures trample and enable some good combat damage. So these are my card filter and card draw spells. Mary's Guile and Sylvan Library I just love for the sake of being able to kind of improve the quality of your card draw. You're looking 3 cards deep and you can choose the best one. The Bestiary I like for just being able to scry every upkeep, and it combos well with Sylvan Library. And Mary's Guile, you can scry a card away and take the best one that you want. Phyrexian Arena, just good card draw. And Eternal Witness. These are all, I think, kind of self-explanatory. You've heard about them. The ones that really are more unique to the deck are Momentous Fall. It's kind of a sack outlet as well. Like, instant speed, you can cast it, and if your creature's about to die, and you can get some value off your creatures dying as well. Or if you don't have a sack outlet on the board, but you have Grave Pact or something else, this kind of still enables other cards in your deck to function for some really good value. Promise of Power, Reforge the Soul, and the Revelation are all just really powerful cards. In my opinion, I like them way better than a Harmonize, because Harmonize seemed a little boring to me, just drawing 3 cards. These all have potential to be way more powerful. I mean, Promise of Power promises you power. Like, you draw 5 cards and lose 5 life, or if you don't need cards, you just can get a 5/5, or you get a Flying Black Demon based on the number of the cards in your hand, so it kind of scales, but you know, it has a lot more potential than just being drawing 3 cards. You can do more with a Promise of Power than a Harmonize. Then Reforge the Soul can really disrupt what your opponent's plans are. If they just tutored for a card, or you have little to no cards left in hand and everyone else has 6 or 7, like, this can really swing the tide of a game and draw you lots of cards. The Revelation is pretty powerful for the ferocious part of it. You know, if you can get all your creatures above 4 power, then you're able to gain a lot of life, and this deck needs some solid life gain to sometimes get back in the late game, because you're really aggressive and typically you're losing life from various means, and yeah, you just need to get that life back. And Tooth and Nail is just, I think, self-explanatory. What I mean, usually you search for Vengeance Zendikar and Crater Hoof Behemoth, but sometimes you might want a Haste Enabler or something else. It's a really good card. This deck doesn't run as many spot removals as I typically would, but I noticed one big weakness so far has been lack of artifact and enchantment removal. I have a lot of creature removal, and I have Grave Pact and other effects that can force my opponents to sacrifice creatures, so these are cards more oriented on destroying artifacts and enchantments like Crow's Grip and Reclamation Sage and Fiery Confluence. I had a Beast Within in here. Chaos Warp I'm not really a fan of. Beast Within is very versatile and has potential of giving you to like beast tokens if you need it, so I definitely would recommend putting that into the deck, maybe instead of Puppet's Verdict. This one was more just a pet card, something that I recently discovered and I fell in love with, and it's very chaotic. I mean, it's a 3 casting cost instant, potential board wipe, so you flip a coin. If you win the flip, destroy all creatures with power 2 or less. If you lose the flip, destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. Well, you know what? I mean, I'm planning to sacrifice all my Cobalts, and they're just currency to me anyways. So if that happens, it's like, okay, you know, I cast this at instant speed. Okay, well, all my Cobalts are gonna die. Well, then I can just sacrifice all my Cobalts to do something else, and I haven't really lost anything. But you know, if it can destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, then that really clears the board for my Cobalts to attack, right? Like, and this is even more enjoyable if you can play this in conjunction with Beastmaster Ascension before you attack and get those counters, like potentially wipe the board of all the big creatures, and then your creatures become big and storm through kind of idea. So it's very fun. Degree of Pain is also card draw. You destroy all the creatures. If you have a whole bunch of Cobalts, you're drawing lots of cards. Insurrection I like in this deck because you can take control of the whole battlefield basically, attack your opponents, and then sacrifice all the creatures before returning them. And Blasphemous Act and Toxic Deluge are just premium removal for this deck. I mean, you're able to typically cast Blasphemous Act for 1, and Toxic Deluge, you don't necessarily have to pay that much life to wipe the board, but it's a pretty good like board wipe. So those are the removal cards. What are your thoughts on Puppet's Verdict? I want to hear about it, because this is something I discovered recently, and I maybe made mention of it in a previous video. I think it's potentially a really powerful card. especially for red. I mean, how many instant speed board wipes are there in red? I can't even think of one. And secondly, I mean, coin flip cards are pretty rare, and they're very fun and interactive, and, you know, at worst, you don't end up wiping the board and you don't make an impact in the game, but you're still having a good laugh with your friends, and it generates some conversation. People have to, like, look at your card and be like, hey, what does that do again? Like, never seen that before, and some of those moments are actually quite enjoyable. Another thing I'm excited for is the Commander 2017 sets coming out. There's a lot of new dragon support, so, you know, if you see cards in there that you think might go well in this deck, well, let me know. Thanks for all the suggestions. This deck has been, like, morphing and changing over the years, and a big part of it has been from you as viewers, improving it and giving really awesome suggestions. It's my very first Commander deck, and gone through probably the most changes of any deck that I own, and it's been the most play-tested. I feel like this deck is very consistent. I don't really pull it out unless I've had a few bad games, or I'm a little salty, or feel like I've lost a whole bunch. Then I might pull this out, because I don't remember too many games that I've lost with the deck. Prossh is kind of an engine that once you get it running, it's really hard to deal with and disrupt. And it doesn't really care what your opponents are doing on their side of the board. But anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you have a great week.